Oh, it's Rog. It's Wednesday, and what have we just witnessed? The Europa Conference League final, a game honestly up there with the Minnesota Timberwolves Super Bowl as one of the biggest ever in sports. Won in emotional scenes by Olympiacos. Oh, as the great Greek philosopher Aristotle once said, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence is not an act, but a habit. I don't know either. Whoopa! History made by a team who came back from a 4-1 first leg home defeat against Maccabi Tel Aviv in the round of 16, stuck 6 goals past Aston Villa. I don't know how they did it either in the semis. Agony in Florence for Fiorentina. That late goal that did them in 1-0. Oh, meaning the Ouzo will flow freely in Athens tonight. It'll feel like 480 BCE all over again. Oh, after a game whose only talking point was, why is the Conference League final after the Europa League final? Make it make sense. And I'm not here alone to revel in every delicious missed kick from Athens and to break down the managerial madness that's gripping Chelsea, Manchester United, Bayern Munich, maybe even Manchester City soon, and more. It's really an incredible joy to welcome a bloke who I've honestly long revered, first as a player, where he charged through the Manchester City Academy to play under Noel Gallagher's non-poisoning watchful eye for 8 years, ultimately winning the league for Manchester City while playing for QPR on Aguero Day. He's also a huge American sports fan thanks to his spell at Real Salt Lake. He's proper Utah in the best of ways. He was also the only Premier League player, I believe, to get 3 bloody A's at A-level. America, I don't have time to explain that achievement to you, but it means he's pretty much a rocket scientist. Most of all, I love the way he thinks about football and the way he talks about football. It's an incredible joy to welcome Mr. Nedum Onuoha.
I don't know. That was probably the best 2 minutes I've had in media since I retired. Everything you've just said there, talking about Aristotle, talking about my A levels, that was very, very impressive. So it's a very good way to start. Very good way.
Jimmy Nicol wrote it for me. All of that stuff.
All right,
Everything
take it
that
back
now
then.
happens is just
Plagiarism.
It's
I'm
just
not
me.
with that
Yeah,
anymore.
it's just
Yeah,
me
you and your
on my-
writers.
Nedum, I gotta tell you, when I Google you, you do hear how rare a footballer you really are. Stephen Ireland, one of your teammates at City, told a story about how when you were studying for your high school finals, you were pissed off that you only got 97 in a test, so you retook it to make sure you got 100.
Yes and no. Yes and no. I wouldn't say I was stressed out. I was more so feeling domestic pressures. Being from Nigeria, there is a high bar when it comes to education, and it's not one of those things you can escape. So sometimes you gotta push that a little bit harder if you think you can do more. And I
And
managed to do that when I was younger.
Stephen Ireland went on to tell Daniel Taylor in the article a story about how much, really, as a student, made you stand out within the world of football. I remember Stephen Highway when I was a kid in Liverpool. He actually went to university, then played for Liverpool, and because he read the newspaper every day, they called him Professor. That like made him And I read Ireland said one day Nedum came in. And his school bag, all his work from his lessons, his books, his notes, his everything, it had been lit on fire, says Stephen Ireland, not by me. And he said they put it in a wheelie bin in the car park, lit it on fire. Can you imagine how devastated he was? Nedum, did this happen? And just how devoed were you?
Yeah, it did happen, and I was devastated. Not least of all because I'd put lots of good work in there. But that was from a different time when sort of football culture and humor was very, very different. It was
Humor.
less open-minded, let's say. But I managed to do what I needed to do, and the lesson was to not bring my bag into well, I was going to say into school, not bring my
Books.
bag into training.
Yeah, books should
Because
not be in
clearly that's a
training.
different world. That's a different world. We can't educate ourselves there. We must only play football.
An encyclopedia, what's that? There are conspiracy theorists who thought young Nedum set his own bag on fire.
No. No. Listen, for the price of those books, there's no chance I was doing that back then. No way. No way.
God bless you, Nedum. And we are not here alone because this is a Do It Live, which means you, dear GFOPs, massive part of the show, can ask us anything. Football, tonight's game. What a game. The managerial merry-go-round, the US women, the men's games to come, or just life in general. Here's how. Scan that QR code in the top left of your screen, take you onto a Zoom with our producer J-Dubs, who will get you set up to ask your question. Come and be with me and Nedum. It's audio only, so you don't have to put a shirt on or slap your question into the chat, and we'll get into it through the show. Come and be with us. But I do want to start with my third first Michelob Ultra of the day. To news breaking that CONCACAF could potentially get a new international team joining our family. I crap you not. Greenland submitted an application to join. Just when you thought CONCACAF couldn't get any CONCACAFia. Can you imagine an away day in the capital, Nuuk, which I hadn't heard about until this application came in. Population 19,604. Stadium, Nuuk Stadium, capacity 2,000 people. Average temperature, 16 degrees Fahrenheit. No FIFA ranking. And from everything that I've heard about Greenland, that I've just read to you, that's all I know. I think you'll agree. They sound proper CONCACAF and should fit right in. Can I ask you, Nedum, as someone that repped England youth team, that's you. You also got called up by Nigeria, so you are familiar with UEFA and CAF. Do you have any general sense of our beautiful CONCACAF? Do you know what we're all about over here, like as the Star Wars cantina of world football?
It's an interesting place. It's a very interesting place. I think they... from what I've seen, they like to do things a bit differently. It certainly is entertaining. And I think if you add Greenland into that, then did you say the capital was Nuuk or did you say Tuk?
My pronunciation may be off. And if anyone is watching this from Greenland, please jump on and add to our knowledge about Nuuk, N-U-U-K.
Nuuk. Okay, so you just got to ask the question: can like some of these stars do it on a cold Tuesday night in Nuuk? The question is, will they do it? I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. It may have unleashed a new powerhouse here on world football.
I can't wait for Mikel Antonio and Jamaica to have a crucial World Cup qualifier away in Nuuk.
It'd be fantastic.
There will not be enough gloves for that man to put on to get to that game. But let's get into it. We got the Conference League final to discuss. I may or may not have fallen asleep towards the end of the second half. It ended Olympiacos 1, Fiorentina 0. First of all, Nedum, I know you're proper City and you follow a team that wins things, big things, the biggest things. But before we break down the game, a game, admittedly, was a bit of a finger in the eye. Can I go on the record and say I do love this tournament? I really do. In all seriousness, it empowers normal teams and their fan bases to journey across the continent and dream. It's like the rest of football's filled with bodybuilders, some of them slightly roidy. And the Conference League is just filled with like run-of-the-mill normal human beings with a little bit of a tummy, bit of a gut, and they are allowed to live life to the full. I think that's the theory of this tournament anyway, right, Nedum?
You would say so. But then again, I'm looking at it very much from like an English perspective. It's the position in the league where people don't realize that they can qualify to be in Europe. But if they're a team that is underperforming and they finish in that position, it's like, oh, we failed this season because we're in the Conference League. But if you have a team maybe like a Bournemouth who were in 10th, for example, who had the chance to qualify for it, then, oh my God, we are in Europe. This is the best thing ever. But Roger, you probably know this. So this is the third ranking European competition, yeah? Mm-hmm. And I think historically that was maybe what the UEFA Cup was. Would that be fair?
Yeah, that or the Cup Winners' Cup.
Yeah, I think it was the UEFA Cup. And interestingly, looking back, I didn't perceive the UEFA Cup in the same way that I perceived the Conference League, even though it's essentially the same thing.
I mean, it's definitely got a branding problem. I'd just love to have been in that marketing room when that was the best that these brains could come up with. They're like, we don't want to trump our alpha product, the Champions League. And that's what they came up with.
To be fair, it's probably a bit better than like Europa League Light or something like that. You know what I mean? Like,
I'm interested. Like Michelob Ultra, superior light beer. What are you saying?
Each to their own. It could work. It definitely could work. But I think
the Conference League is just like the other option was to call it just like mid or basic or
But
entry level. Chelsea Football Club, whatever we're saying, are in that tournament next season.
exactly,
I will love every
I'll be honest,
Yeah.
from my perspective, and I think the perspective of others. Well, to be fair, not mine, because I just watch football regardless. It doesn't really
Yeah.
matter to me whether
Yeah.
it's like Conference League or Sunday League. I'm going to be watching it. Not to say the two are related, because they're not. Let's get ahead of that now. But teams take an interest in the second half of the season when they can see their pathway towards a final. West Ham last year, the first few games, they're playing on a Thursday night on like an obscure channel, like maybe through a red button. You've got to watch it online. Nobody's really into it.
Yeah.
Then towards the
Shame.
end, they're playing some big games in Europe, and they finished the season with a European trophy, their first, I believe, in their history. And all of a sudden, it's not the Conference League anymore. It's a European trophy. And you ask, oh, well, who had a better season? Was it Arsenal or was it West Ham? And people are like, well,
Did Arsenal have David Moyes hug David Moyes' dad in tears on the sideline? Did they?
It's a real playing in Europe, having done it twice. It's amazing.
Did you get a
It's
bonus?
genuinely
Did you get a
amazing. Yeah.
bonus for getting to the Conference League, or do you get?
You will do,
did you
yeah.
Get, did you get money taken off your salary?
I think, to be fair, I think it depends if you're supposed to be in the Champions League or not. But I think from when you do qualify for it, it's a good experience. But more so when you get to the knockout stages and all the teams are a bit more familiar, instead of some of the ones where they've all earned the right to be there, but you get the feeling that the fans aren't going to spend big money to go and watch you play against the Finnish team that's in seventh or something like that. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, KM Boom in the chat says the Conference League accomplished what it set out to do. I agree. It did today what it said on the tin. So let's dive into what happened in Athens tonight. Yasu, Olympiacos, Aston Villa Slayers, led by our old friend Jose Luis Mendilibar, who won with Sevilla last season and arrived in Olympiacos February the 11th. We last saw him lead Sevilla into last year's final, so it was back-to-back for him. Italian wonders Fiorentina have not won a trophy of any kind since 2001, owned by an American, a billionaire cable TV entrepreneur, Rocco Camiso, who you may know from such movies as The New York Cosmos. Both teams, let's say, underwhelming seasons in league play. Fiorentina 8th in Serie A. Even James Horncastle probably find it quite hard to big up their league season. Olympiacos 3rd in the Greek league. Nedum, take us back before kickoff to more innocent times. What were you expecting? What did the early, slightly frantic exchanges tell you? Because I spent essentially the first 15 minutes just a bit bummed that Fiorentina were not wearing their traditional purple.
Yeah. So before the game, I was thinking Fiorentina were the side that were probably going to go out and win the game. And I think they've got like a style of play which I like. And you hear the story about them because they were in the final last year as well, weren't they? And they feel hard done by in terms of West Ham beating them on that occasion. So here's the storyline. Surely you don't lose 2 finals in a row. Obviously the game's in Athens, but it's in a rival stadium, so it's not just great vibes in there, even though it's convenient. So I was a full believer in Fiorentina. And then as the game started, it's a bit frenetic. There are a couple of chances, but then as time passed, I'll be honest, Rog, it was one of those games where it felt like both teams kind of didn't want to lose, if that makes sense. I thought Fiorentina overall were better, in my opinion, but you could see that like there was a fear of conceding the first goal. And that meant that sometimes, I think as a player, it's very easy to take a step back and choose to do something defensive over something attacking because you don't want to overcommit and leave yourself open. So that's why there were so many like longer passes, goalkeeper squeezing everybody up. They probably don't play like that on a week-to-week basis. But for a final, like you see the nerves come out. That's why a lot of finals end up being quite underwhelming.
I think that's totally fair. I mean, the game became... I've been listening to a lot of Malian trance music, which has its own particular addictive quality. The game reminded me a little bit about that. Let's just say it was a slow burn. Fiorentina, managed by Vincenzo Italiano, the most Italian-sounding man who ever Italianed. In the same way as I do believe Southampton's Will Smallbone might just be the most English man that ever Englished. Anyway, Fiorentina, they had most of the good intent. I agree with you. They attempted to control the midfield with their slightly undynamic passing. Mendilibar has made Olympiacos a much more pressing team looking to strike directly in transition. And you told me just after halftime that you saw in this two teams who were, in your words, inhibited by losing a final rather than trying to win one.
Yeah, and to be honest, I don't blame them. I think there's an element of, unless you've been to lots of finals, you don't really know how to play them. And I think for maybe Fiorentina, knowing what it felt like to lose one last year, they would have tried to come in with a different approach. But then they also know the style of play that Olympiacos have. They could hit you on the counter, so you can't overcommit. Like, we, as a neutral, you want to watch a game where it's like end to end, so many chances, but we don't have that level of like nervousness and anxiety that the players will have within them, because it's a European final. It's the last game of the season, so it's
90 minutes of stage fright. Is that what you're saying? Is that what we watched together?
Well, let's say, I think I saw the stats and Olympiacos had one shot in the second half. So I think if we said that was them attempting to try and win a game, I think we'd probably be lying to the audience. And I think the people in the chat would expose us very, very quickly.
It was stage fright. And by the way, Andrea Bocelli, Rod Stewart, Barbara Streisand all get it. So why not Sotiris Alexandropoulos? I was crapping myself at the prospect of having to say that. But the quality of the game, well, let's just say it was a very acquired taste.
Yes.
Neither keeper had much to do. I think Fiorentina's Kouame with the shot, whacking it into the ground, a missed kick that led to a terrific reaction save for the Olympiacos keeper, Takis. That pretty much summed up the quality of the game. Fiorentina made a vague fist of it. Their decision-making in the final third was at Beto levels. God bless you, Beto. I kept wondering, what would the equivalent in English football be of this? I wondered, were we watching the equivalent of Nottingham Forest play Brentford? Then I realised Olympiacos, smashed Aston Villa. Smashed them.
Yeah.
How?
They did.
How, Nedum? Well, Unai Emery must have been watching this and thinking, what?
It's seeing like Mendilibar in the last round, when Unai Emery has his Sevilla connections as well. He's a European king as such. That would have been disappointing. But he knows in that game, like, Olympiacos just let Villa have all the possession in the world. They went from like 37 to 35% in the next game. But Villa kind of overcommit to a certain extent, whereas Fiorentina would never do that. Italian teams, it's just not in their culture at all. So I think at times, like, matchups matter in terms of style of play as well, because I think it's fair to say, I believe it's fair to say that Villa were favourites, and the fact that they're not in the final means a lot. But their approach to the matchup against Olympiacos is why they're not there.
God, matchups matter. By the way, Fiorentina, their one regret will be they did not exhume and sub back Giuseppe Rossi in. He would have won this one in a heartbeat. No one wanted extra time. So, of course, it went to extra time. Nedum, you come on once and we get to talk about a game that was a bit like watching Everton play Everton reserves. Have you played in games like this when you are running around and everyone is trying their hardest? Every player was trying their hardest. They're exhausted at the end of the season. Their legs are ground down from hard seasons. But you just know you are playing in a very bad game of football.
Yes. Yes. So I played in probably 450 games, and I also got relegated twice. So picture the scene where you're losing a lot of games in the season anyway. And I believe it was 2014-15. And it was when I was at Queen's Park Rangers and we were playing Reading away. It was towards the end of the season, and both of us were in the bottom three. And one of us needed to win to extend our run in the league for at least another week. Yeah, one of us needed to, for that to be the case. And this game was it was like a Super Sunday, so it's like an exclusive game. The game, Rog, finished 0-0, and we both went down that Sunday. So if you want to be curious about what that type of game was, then yeah.
What's it feel like?
I think from my standpoint, like, even though I was a defender, I believe you live and die by your attackers, and I'd rather be a guy that doesn't keep a clean sheet throughout the season, as long as you attackers have got the ability to win any game of football. And I'm sure you're sensing that a little bit with, say, Everton, for example. But when you're on there and you just know your team's not going to score, for not just the striker's fault, just like everyone, it's a horrible feeling. You're just there looking at the clock, hoping, and you've spent 10 months, like, someone will miss a chance, say, oh, don't worry, the next one, a month later, the next one, we're down. Yeah, so it's tough going, and you can tell the crowd aren't into it because they start singing songs that aren't even in relation to the game at all. But you're out there, you're in the Premier League, so you do the best that you can.
Early in extra time, ex-Fiorentina and Manchester City prodigy Stefan Jovetic cut inside, lashed, forcing a scurrying save. Fluid football fleetingly broke out, and 116-minute it reappeared. Tired legs, tired minds. Heze flicked a ball to the front post, and it was met by his Olympiacos teammate. Great near post run by their iconic Moroccan forward El Kaabi, the man who single-handedly dismantled Aston Villa in the semi-finals, a man who scored 34 goals on the season. Of course it was him for his 11th and most important goal of the European competition. There was a VAR check, but VAR mercifully ruled that we did not want to watch more of that crap and just said, carry on here. And thank God for that, Nedum, because the Olympiacos owner, Evangelos Marinakis, he would have unleashed his Greek version of Mark Clattenburg and shut the game down, wouldn't he?
It must be said, by the way, considering how long that VAR check was, it was the most patient sort of like crowd I think I've ever heard. It was such a long time, and they were just like, okay, maybe this will be it. Perhaps, okay, still perhaps, maybe. We shall see. And to be fair, because it's an offside decision, I thought it would have been done quicker. But I'm sure it must have been really, really tight. But when that gets given, the excitement, and then only 5 minutes added time as well, even though it took probably 6 to make the decision, I'll turn my back on that. I'm sure Marinakis is a very, very happy man now.
I am. And I'm not saying he's a bribe, but you've just given a very odd and very truthful synopsis of everything that happened afterwards. It didn't make a lot of sense, but did it need to? It was just agony for Fiorentina, lose their second European final in consecutive years. I do feel for them. But Olympiacos manager Medili Bar wins his second European trophy in that same spell. And Olympiacos, this is magic, became the first Greek club to win in human civilization. When you talk about Greek clubs, you don't talk about in their history. You talk about the span of human civilization. First club to win a European trophy from that great footballing nation. Socrates could never, Plato could never, Aristotle could never. They all sound like great Brazilian footballers.
I'm sure they all were as well. But yeah, it's incredible. Absolutely incredible. I think again, being in the UK, we're very privileged to have seen like domestic and European success. Obviously not necessarily with the national team. We just get used to seeing the same names, the same like countries dominate European football. But this is truly historic. And bizarrely as well, the last Greek triumph that I remember was them winning the European Championships in 2004, which still doesn't make sense to this day. Or was it 2000, 2004? Which year was it?
It was 2000. It was 2000. It was 2000. I mean, it doesn't make sense. It was like they played like Everton through the tournament. There was 2004. It was Tark and Greek Brantwaite at the back, shutting the game down, necking one goal, holding on for dear life. Broius Bro in the chat says Greek UEFA coefficient to the moon. You're right. I mean, these games, that is what is refreshing about this. I mean, the Europa League final, stunningly magnificent. And this, the Champions League, the winner of it, ultimately predetermined by cold hard cash, the economics of the super club. The days when Mourinho's Porto, that was 2004 too, could win it. They feel almost as close as the Victorian era, really, now. Just an elite handful of clubs are even options. Your Newcastles, your Leicesters, your Aston Villas next season will almost certainly just arrive and depart. It really is the Europa League and the Conference League where, for me, the true spirit of the game resides. It's not always all that fun for the rest of us to watch, as it wasn't tonight. But my God, to our Greek fans, Godspeed, make great memories together. We're going to take your questions in one moment. First, we do have a couple of Premier League seismic happenings we've got to discuss because we are in the era of massive managerial moves. Football is almost in its post-player reality. We fans don't care about players anymore. Managerial moves are where it's at. And yesterday, Fabrizio Romano of the Men in Blazers Network's Here We Go podcast fame announced that Chelsea are ready to give Leicester's Enzo Maresca a 5-year deal. 44-year-old Maresca was the assistant manager under Pep Guardiola during Manchester City's treble-winning season of 2022-23. 2 spells at the Etihad interrupted by his first little dabble in management, a fleeting 14-game stint at Parma that I don't think he had on his LinkedIn, so Chelsea don't know about that. Last season, he had Leicester back to the Premier League at the first go, 97 points earned in the process, an easy on the eye possessional style, passing, proactive. Football, he's got a reputation for improving young players in the process. My friend James Horncastle wrote a really beautiful piece about Maresca's fascination with chess, in which he drops this line: a coach can only benefit from acquiring the mind of a good chess player, the proof being the development of a number of mental skills that are excellent for the prefrontal cortex. I cannot wait for him to try and explain that to Cole Palmer. God bless. Maresca will be the 4th permanent manager of Clear Lake Capital's 2-year reign after Thomas Tuchel, Graham Potter and Pochettino. I do feel for Leicester fans. Big team swooping in on their latest big thing before he's even led them to a single game back in the Premier League. But that's modern football. You're not allowed nice things. Nedum, what do you make of this Pochettino replacement? A new, young, unproven guy leading a squad that's stuffed with mostly new, young, unproven guys on a long-term contract. I guess I'm saying, what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, of course, it's clearly going to work out perfectly, isn't it? Everyone's going to be on board from the get-go. No dramas whatsoever. No questions about his credentials. The way that football goes in England, there's hardly anything ever spoken about, not least of all Chelsea. So yeah, I'm sure it'll be fine. But I think what it but and this is the big but. Like, I think at times I think it pays to be open-minded, yeah. And I think football is constantly evolving. And I think what we're seeing at Chelsea, what we're seeing potentially at Bayern, what we're seeing potentially in other places, is this creation of an idea whereby we're not hiring managers anymore. We're hiring coaches that do a very specific job that is just like, it's super specific to have a style of play, to coach a bunch of players to do a certain thing, whilst also having that head coach working alongside a technical director, maybe a sporting director, the board, and everyone else, keeping the jobs that they have, but also having a similar level of importance, for as strange as that may sound. Do you get where I'm coming from?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I've got a quick follow-up for you, because you said at the beginning, you said, footballers, you hinted, footballers do. If 2 managers say the same thing, but one manager has won 5 Champions League and the other manager's won nothing, footballers receive that information differently. We're always told, footballers didn't respect him, he's not won anything. Or Zidane gets the respect of everyone in that Real Madrid locker room because he's won everything. Is that really true, that footballers are constantly just like essentially measuring their footballing pedigree?
Yes, but I think it goes beyond what football is as well, because I think you just find things like that in society. Think how many people are desperate to hear information from like somebody that's a billionaire, but then someone could give them the same advice from the street who's homeless, but it doesn't hit the same. So I think that definitely is the thing. But what I would say as well, in this sort of era of like managers, there was a lot of reliance on their assistant and their other coaches, and players tend to have a better bond with a coach than they do with a manager, because the manager's above everything, whereas the coach is the one who you will see setting up the session, who you speak to on a day-to-day basis. And very often that coach doesn't have the same sort of like credentials as the manager. So there is scope for, say, a head coach without key credentials to come and make a difference, because he'll present something that the players want to buy into. I think at times you can have some coaches or head coaches where they've done a lot and they've won a lot of things in their playing careers, but they don't know how to put on a good training session. They don't know how to speak to players. And so there's an element of resentment. Even though they've got the respect from day one, they can't develop from that. Whereas I think other coaches, people see them and wonder what they're going to be like. And then if they do something good, then people are on board really heavily, because they almost come from a more sort of like modest standpoint.
It is fascinating. I mean, it does feel like every club suddenly wants an Arteta now, like a project manager from the Pep coaching tree, someone who's tactically savvy, a builder, as if Arteta's as replicable as Pep is. Neither man is. But,
sorry to jump in. You said this yourself before, though. It's player development. And I think that's the thing that's key. I think there's a belief that like younger coaches have got a greater ability to develop players in the short, medium, and long term. So when you find a club that has lots of young players within it, they're not going to respond in a great way overall to like a sort of older classic style of management as such, because they want to be told all the little details. They want to be treated as, like people from this generation as opposed to other ones. It's not to say that Pochettino wasn't that at Chelsea, but then also this younger manager idea and this head coach idea, they can go into a meeting with the technical director, with this other person and so on, and work together instead of that like omnipotent manager that really owns a football club. And when it's going well, that's great. But when it's not going well, all of a sudden you've got to get rid of players who that manager said that they needed and had to have, but didn't work out, as we've seen historically for many years in the Premier League.
It's so fascinating. I remember someone asking Tony Pulis what's the difference between a tracksuit manager. There used to be a concept of a tracksuit manager in English football, and Tony Pulis said a tracksuit manager is a manager that showers with his players, and a manager wearing a suit, he's got his own executive shower. And I didn't quite understand it. I don't understand it now, but I think you're saying something along those lines. And by the way, Snidely in the chat says, Nedum, you are a master wordsmith.
I see him. I see Snidely. I've got the chat open. Shout out to everyone in the chat. Yeah,
Nedum got 3 A's at A level. I'll just keep saying it. To United, Ten Hag in his post-FA Cup wing glow. As Ineos, the new controlling owner, set to work and offer early redundancies to Manchester United staff on a voluntary basis. I bet Anthony would take that offer in a heartbeat. Sir Jim Ratcliffe is going to make his first big decision now, one that will define his early tenure amidst a quite complex, unforgiving currents of ever-changing fan mood. Has he? Will he? Should he fire Ten Hag, the man who delivered United's worst ever Premier League finish of 8th? Had a goal difference of -1, conceded more shots than any side apart from Sheffield United, had terrible injuries, yes, and a slew of traumas, some of which were self-inflicted, some of which were not, on and on and on. Tuchel, Pochettino, De Zerbi. How is Bruce Arena not linked? I don't understand that. But they're all linked to Old Trafford. The Manchester Evening News, which is loosely the New York Times of Manchester, unfurled a very reliable poll that suggests Ten Hag retains the support of the club's fans. 78%, Nedum, of 10,000 respondees indicated they would like Ten Hag to stay. Nedum, you are close to the ground in Manchester. Does that sound right to you in terms of popular opinion? What's your sense of the political tides for old ETH?
I think if the poll was done 3 weeks ago, I'm not sure it would have been 78% or whatever the number was that you said. But given the fact that they're walking away after winning a Manchester derby at Wembley for the FA Cup, it's all nice, isn't it? It was a nice day down south in the sun, seeing them beat City, this big upset as underdogs. But the point that you made, I think, is the most important one, is the fact that they're 8th in the Premier League with a negative goal difference. This is their worst ever season in the Premier League. And to say you support the manager, it feels like some people have supported him through the year, whilst also saying how bad the team is. And I don't know how both things can be true when one guy is kind of responsible for the team. So I think the number feels high, but I guess that's as a reaction to what has been, a great finish to the season for them as such, with the youngsters scoring goals and then winning a trophy. But I don't think, it's not that I don't think he's the right person, because I don't know him enough. I don't know what they're like on a day-to-day basis training-wise. But if you're going to be held accountable for performance, then I think the guy that is attached to their worst season in Premier League history wouldn't necessarily normally have nearly 80% support from fans of the football club.
I know it's a madness. I think like most political polls, I had accuracy of plus or minus 50%. But across Manchester, Pep Guardiola, your fearless leader, Nedum, has begun to kind of pop out trial balloons about his own possible departure. Perhaps still steving at his tactical mistake in the FA Cup final, which was going suit and tie. Should never have gone suit and tie. I know. It was. Why would you do that? Why would you go suit and tie when you've been going sloppy athletic leisure wear all bloody season? Pep started to test the message that possibly he's undecided on whether or not to sign a new contract when his current deal expires summer of 2025. Honestly, that's a seismic piece of news, not just for the manager, but just the whole shifting sands, the rumblings of who'll come in, who'll go amidst this crevice of uncertainty. Nedum, you understand and you know City. You're like a Kremlinologist of the Etihad. You're like a Mancunian Kerry Bradshaw. How do you understand what's going on over there?
Terrific. You do have a way with words.
By the way, I didn't get 3 A's. I got 2 A's and a B.
This all right. Listen, nobody's perfect except me, but that's fine.
I know your mother would not be pleased with me.
So with Guardiola, I think the impact that he's had, not just on Manchester City, but you could say English football overall, has been astonishing. I think you could argue, for me, outside of like Arsene Wenger and the sort of foreign influx of managers that came and a different perception of what it was to be a footballer around the late 90s, early 2000s, I think he's been incredibly consequential, and the success that he's brought to City and the sort of different styles of play, you can see it not just in the Premier League, you can see it all the way down the football pyramid. Like, I'm watching my kids train, and they're only like 6 and 5, and I'm watching them try and train, but the way they're trying to train is based around stuff which I've seen Man City do, for years and stuff, through the way Guardiola's doing things, inverted fullbacks and all that stuff. So for him to be leaving, I think it would be a shame from the City perspective, because I think this era, in terms of success that they've had, is the greatest era that the club have ever had. I think the fact that they've won 4 trophies in a row, again, that's historic. The treble last year, winning their first Champions League, that's historic. And even though they've had tons of good players throughout the years he's been there, this will always feel like the Guardiola era. And when an era comes to an end, and everyone knows at some point it will come to an end, but when it all of a sudden feels like it's just a year away, because you know where you were a year before, now it's just a year away, what comes next? And that's a big question about himself, the players there, the football club, the Premier League, especially with Jurgen Klopp leaving this summer as well. Like, all of a sudden it feels new. And that idea of new isn't something that many people are pining for when you're currently in a position whereby you have a lot of success. But the other side of it is, he's done such a good job there that he has every right to walk away when he's ready. I think he's a manager that transcends at this moment in time being sacked, the same way I say Jurgen Klopp does, the same way it feels like an Arteta kind of does at this moment in time. And it would be a great shame, and so many people would miss him. But I'll be honest, I didn't think when he first joined Man City, was it 8 years ago? I did not think he would have spent half his managerial career here. That blows my mind. And this is a guy, as I say, this is Barcelona through and through. 3 years there, 3 years in this place, and 7, 8 years at Man City. How did that come to be? But at some point, it has to come to an end, and I'll be devastated when it does, because he's, like, I know there's a debate about who's the best and so on, but he is my favorite manager of all time, because I've loved the supporting Man City is easy for me because I'll get to see them play the way they do. But one of my favorite ever teams to watch was the Barcelona side he had when he first started as a head coach as well. So he's my favorite because he's shown a different style of football, which has basically changed it for, in my opinion, the better.
It's either him or Sean Dyche in the tracksuit Sean Dyche era. But
dangerous manager. Tracksuit Sean Dyche is dangerous because you know you're in trouble.
I know, it's what I'm saying, but don't get me off on the tracksuit manager again, and I'll talk about Tony Pulis some more. But Sharon Rivers Tez, can you complete this sentence? Manchester City without Pep Guardiola are what?
I think without going into like full details about, say, things that maybe happen in October or not, like to talk generally, I would say that they are in a better position now. If he left today, they'd be in a better position today than they were before he arrived, because he's changed the culture at the football club.
Because they've still got Cheeky Burgerstein, the director of
football. who at some point will go. But a lot of the players who we see at City now have been there for a long time. And the way that they perceive themselves in that space and have changed the way that people think about the football club that come into it. So the job after Guardiola leaves is one where you cannot fill his boots, but you've got a setup there which is built to try and be successful, whether it's the players, whether it's the staff, whether it's the training facilities. The mentality is one whereby the manager is the special bit at the end, but the rest of it is still there, if that makes sense.
God bless. Keep telling yourself that. To me, Man City without Pep Guardiola, and slap it in the chat if you've got ideas. It's like Rolling Stones without Mick Jagger. It's like Jose Mourinho without his head. It's almost impossible to contemplate.
If you okay, let me put it this way. I understand what you're saying. So, say for example, if City going into the next season didn't have Guardiola, and they had another manager come in who obviously isn't going to be as good as he is or doesn't have that same connection.
Roy Hodgson.
Roy's resting. Let's not choose Roy. Let's choose somebody else. Say they brought in say Thomas Tuchel came in. Yeah. Do you think City can get more than 80 points?
God. I mean, here's what I'll say about Man City, and this to me, the 115 charges, whatever you want to say about them, the greatest thing that Manchester City have done under Guardiola, once he invented his style of football in his laboratory, like the mad professor, was the battle against complacency.
100%.
And ultimately, that trick is, we take it for granted. We saw it drop in the FA Cup final. The FA Cup final loss almost made me appreciate City more, because that can happen at any time, but it doesn't.
Yeah.
So to be honest, that would be the thing that I would worry about. I agree with you, and I love you. And it's a fascinating conversation. The culture he's created will live on. But it's that battle against complacency. I do not know how he's done it. You saw the Spanish national team when they went on that World Cup winning streak, and then they just rolled into the 2014 World Cup. And you speak to the Spanish players, they were like, we all thought we knew what we were doing. We tuned the coach out. We were arseholes. It just kind of happens. And that's ultimately, I think, is the greatest challenge, Nedum.
I think that is fair. That's why, from my perspective, I obviously want City to do well because it's my hometown club and all that stuff. But I think where some people are slightly misguided in terms of the success that they've had, because you've hit the nail on the head. It is about being like clinical. Like, I don't believe in sort of saying City complacent, because to achieve the 90 plus points in a season, that like they've done this season with the 91, which, they needed 89 or whatever to win the league this year. A manager once told me, and it's a great point, if you beat the bottom 10 sides twice over, that's 60 points. 60 points as the foundation. Man City this year barely beat a team in the top 4 of the league. They beat Aston Villa, and I think that they beat Aston Villa once, and I think that's it.
Yeah.
That is literally it. But we still live in fact, he was in the traditional top 6, beat Aston Villa and they beat Spurs. And also they beat Spurs, just Spurs. And they're like,
was it Pulis?
Yeah, and they're like, but you can look, here's the top 6 ranking. This is how they fare up against each other, blah, blah, blah. But then
it's the other games.
It's the other games, because that's the other games create the foundation for you to be able to have a platform. Like Man United finished on 60 points. It's the equivalent of beating the bottom 10 teams twice over, then losing all the other games. Just think about that. And City, like someone said, they're complacent, they're this. Any team that's up near the top of the table that gets 80 plus points, it isn't complacency, because they've been clinical against all the teams down at the bottom in the positions where people would expect them to be complacent, but instead it's the exact opposite.
It is the battle against complacency, which I admire the most. By the way, talking about City and former football icons who have left, this is amazing. Bayern Munich today made it official. They appointed Vincent Kompany as their new head coach on a 3-year deal. He's 38. God, he's so young still. Succeeds Thomas Tuchel, leaves Burnley for the Bundesliga side for a compensation fee believed to be around $13 million. Kompany won the championship with Burnley last season, a season before last, but the Clarets, we watched them. They won just 5 games, finished 19th. I think a chafing, humbling relegation. And I'm sure the Germans have a word for Samuel Beckett's quote, try again, fail again, fail better. But Nedum, you know Vincent Kompany. You know him very well. You played with him. You even introduced him to his now wife.
I see Disney dorks in the chat trying to come for me. Listen, I wasn't going to mention it, but since you mentioned it,
how do you understand the big leap? Dieser großer Sprung, as I'm sure you're saying now in Germany.
If we could link this back to the Maresca going to Chelsea thing, then I think it makes more sense, because it's I believe it's firstly the talk is that Vincent Company wasn't that high up on the list of people to go straight away for. But it's not to say that he was the last name on the list either. And I think for him and Maresca, they've displayed an ability to coach a team to play in a certain style. And the players for Burnley last year in the Premier League couldn't necessarily like have that style give them the best opportunity of staying up. What I would argue against though is some people say they need to be more pragmatic, need to take more play channel balls, this, that, and the other. Some players are good at that. Some players are not. That the way they played last year, ironically, is the best chance they had to stay up because they weren't big enough, physical enough, direct enough to be able to play in a different style. But again, you know, we say, oh, that's what they should have done. Well, let me introduce you to Luton. Let me introduce you to Sheffield United, who also went down. But it was Burnley who, come the end of the season, felt like they had more form. But in regards to that, a year ago when Company is being promoted with Burnley, he's being linked with Spurs, being linked with these other places. And why would winning the championship title mean that you're good enough to manage Spurs? Well, the reasons are the same reasons why he's potentially gone to Bayern Munich today. It's because of his ability to coach a team to play in the vision that he sees for them. So if he can do it with these players who aren't as talented as, say, potential players elsewhere, then when he goes across to Bayern Munich as a head coach, not as a manager, again, as somebody who's played in the Bundesliga, somebody who understands the way that Bayern Munich works, and somebody that's desperate to test themselves at the highest level, he will do everything in his power to make sure that Bayern go in the right direction.
Oh, Nedum, you are far too rational.
Yeah,
To
sorry, I
be
should have gone more aggressive, shouldn't I?
to be involved in the football. Michael Mackery says Man City without Pep is like Rocky Balboa without Mick. I think Rocky Balboa without Adrian. We have got a ton of questions pouring in. I do want to get to them. I could talk to Nedum all bloody night. What a beautiful human being. But we'll get to your questions. A reminder of how this works here on YouTube Live. Scan that QR code in the top left of your screen or click on the pin, comment in the chat. Take you to a Zoom with our producer, J Dubs, gorgeous man, who can tell you everything you need to know. You can chat to him about Ipswich Town's journey to glory while you're behind the scenes. Don't worry, you won't appear on screen. And for those of you who don't want to ask a question, smash the like button. We'll talk about anything and everything. Let's start with, it's the great Ignacio from Bilbao, who lives in Philadelphia. Oh, whereabout in Philly, Ignacio? Come on up, because you want to ask about, is it Basque coaches? God bless. Ignacio. Hola.
Hello. Hola, Raj. I live in Montgomery County, right outside Conshohocken, right outside Philly.
Oh, beautiful. I hear Jim's Cheesesteaks has reopened, and it makes me want to just race down to your city even as we speak, Ignacio.
We're big Alessandro fans. We're close to it, and we swear by it.
Respect. I've got a lot of respect for that decision, that choice. But you've got a question for the great Nedum.
Listen,
So far away,
I went
baby.
It's been the year of the Basque coach, right? You have Arteta, you have Iraola, you have Emery, you have Lopetegui coming back, Xabi Alonso with an undefeated season. Obviously, Mendilibar wins today with Olympiacos. My question is, Chelsea, Man U, what are you waiting for? So why not look for a Basque coach? And did Liverpool go wrong going Dutch? They have no Basque.
It feels like more of a statement than a question. But yeah, I didn't notice that was a thing, but it appears to be a real thing. But then you could also argue, Italian coaches were in vogue today in the commentary for the Conference League. They were saying, there was an Italian coach that won.
Absolutely true.
Yeah. It's a good question. I think Iraola, especially in England, has surprised a lot of people because when he was replacing Gary O'Neill, people thought, wow, he's done well in Spain. Can he do it in England? And now he was up for like manager of the season or coach of the season rather. So perhaps there is something there. But, you can't do these small sample sizes. We've got to do it again for the next season. And then I'll come on this show and you can come on again and we can confirm Basque coaches are the future.
I mean, Xabi Alonso is probably the person who talks most about it because he's questioned a lot about it. They did ask him, he's been quite precise about whether being in the Bundesliga shaped his thinking. He's like, no, I'm 100% Basque. Whether being in Real Madrid shaped his thinking. Now he's 100% Basque. Rory Smith has talked a lot about it on the European night shows, Ignacio, that we've talked about, and tried to really explain this modern conundrum, because it's not just that they're from the Basque region. I think a number of them are like from about within like 4 square miles, and it's just a perfect petri dish, a little bit like that panhandle area in Florida is for offensive linemen. Like, it just produces, or South London. Like, why is South London such an incredible petri dish for some of the most talented young footballers that England has created in the past decade? And when you understand that concrete Catalonia area right around Crystal Palace, like it's like it can be decoded. And I'd find that European nights where, I mean, the concrete Catalonia is a matter of just like an incredibly talented, diverse, eclectic immigrant population living in an area where there are enough large Premier League teams to invest serious football coaching and just a deep, deep, passionate love for the game and everything that's come forth. Listen to Raw rather than listen to me do it. But how are you bouncing back between Bilbao and Philly? And your accent changes every time. When you call in from Bilbao, Ignacio, you sound genuinely like you just had your ham on. And when you're in Philly, you sound like a different human being.
I've been in Philly for a long time now, but I try to get back to Bilbao as often as I can. Unfortunately, not as often as I would like. But love Philly as well. But Bilbao's in my blood, and we've had the best year we've had in 40 years, and I've been able to share it with my daughters, which is fantastic. So I appreciate all you guys do. I love listening to you guys.
Make great memories with your kids, Ignacio. Ultimately, that is what football is all about. And Nedum, when you say your 5 and your 6-year-old are playing football, if they were not playing in the Man City style, they could have played for Liverpool and they would have come on in the Carabao Cup final. But Joshua Youngerman, hello, old friend, who says, you put in the chat, this might be the best week of my life. Why, Joshua Youngerman? Explain to the world.
I mean, I got to talk to Sam Mewes, and now I get to talk to Nedum Onuoha, who's like maybe my favorite pundit working. So my week can only go down from here.
By the
Even
way,
if he is a Man City supporter.
When you say go down from here, you mean talk to Rog, but fire away at Nedum. Yeah, I love that, by the way. To talk to Nedum, to me, in all seriousness, that's why I'm so giddy to be with him. He is like the most joyful and insightful, far too rational, but he's so bloody good. What's your question for him, Josh?
Yeah, so I have 2 questions, actually. So the first question, and again, I'm saying as an Arsenal supporter, right, that I think that Arteta is probably the best thing to happen to Arsenal in a long time, probably since when Wenger came into the club. But acknowledging this, it just seems from my point of view, I don't know if Nedum agrees on this, but is it not that he might be the worst thing to happen to the Premier League? And the reason I'm saying this, and look, like, I kind of want to see, the world burn as an Arsenal fan. But I would say this, I think these clubs like Chelsea and Chelsea, for example, I think they're learning the wrong reasons or the wrong lessons from what, like, the success with Arteta, because I'm old enough to remember 3 years ago people chanting Arteta out, and it was Arsenal's insistence on keeping him and sticking with him and backing him and understanding that he was going to fail, even though he brought us the trophy in his first year, that he was going to probably fail before he succeeded. And having that patience that allowed, I think, for us to be one of the big contenders for the Premier League next year. So I don't know if Nedum, because you're such a rational person, if you agree with me, but it just seems to me that people are like, oh, Pep disciple, let me get X coach, even though, like, they won't actually give them the chance to succeed or build their project.
Yeah, that's. I think you asked a question in there, but you made a lot of very good statements. I think
3 A's at A level.
I think what was so I really like Arteta. I think he's very good, and I think Arsenal are really impressive. Obviously, I've not enjoyed having to go up against them because at times they do feel relentless. And I think when I look at the future of the Premier League, I see Arsenal sitting at the top because the squad is so young and yet still so good. And they seem to be learning from their experiences as every year passes by. Kind of like the manager as well, because we always forget sometimes that managers can gain in experience and get better as years pass by. I think with Arteta, I do remember those times when there was like Arteta out, and it was like crisis club. But do you believe, Josh, that the reason he stayed on wasn't necessarily because they thought he was going to fail, but he stayed on because he had a connection to the club because he played for them? And I think sometimes, like, the Pep disciple thing might get you work, but I think that connection was what extended him just that little bit more, and he had a bit more of a grace period with that. Do you know what I mean, Raj?
I do. I mean, I'm thinking back to that period. It wasn't just his tactics, which, there was a lot of doubt about them. The squad was full of deadwood bloat. I mean, that was. I remember talking about that period. Like he felt like he was in a logjam. The tactics weren't working. The players were not mentally and tactically able to play the style of football he was trying to enforce. And you looked at the contracts they had and the deadwood. We talk every week about the deadwood, and it leads me to think about this whole managerial piece. Well, two things, two disconnected thoughts. Number one, it wasn't just Arteta that changed that around. It was Edu, the director of football at Arsenal, who pulled off, and even in the documentary, you saw him pull off some incredible moves to change the culture of the locker room and to unload a ton of bloated contracts, people who'd signed Dating for a huge amount of money and had stopped playing. And then that changes the whole culture of the locker room. They were able to extricate a lot of the deadwood. And ultimately, Daryl Morey, who's the 76ers general manager, is fascinated by football. And whenever I see him and chat to him, he's always like, I don't understand why you guys fire managers as often as you do. His point, Nedum, is like, it's rarely the manager's fault. He's like, managers data-wise do not lead to that big an uptick or that big a drop-off. There's that old quote by it comes out of Italian football, that a good manager can improve a team by 10%. A bad manager can worsen a team by 30%. I once asked Jose Mourinho if he agreed with that, and he nodded and goes, "The percentage is a little bit off," but yes. But I mean, ultimately, it's about the whole system. I mean, the system, if I were owned a team, I'd be trying to replicate is Brighton, where they focus on alignment, from Paul Barber, the CEO who came on our show, to the owner, to the manager, through to the players. And when it doesn't work, when De Zerbi starts to unalign, you kind of realize you need to separate. But a manager on their own, Nedum, how much can they do without? I mean, really, as fans who are manager, but from inside a club, you've already hinted at this with your thing about the coach, the manager, the younger manager that people relate to, the CEO manager who they don't. It's a real system that's needed for success. And Arteta at Arsenal ultimately did get that system.
Yeah, I think he's hit it out the park, and I would link it to a manager coming in and having to create a new culture. I think if a manager can come to a place, then they don't have to. Then more often than not, they're coming to replace someone that's been headhunted to go elsewhere. But when it's a manager that's been fired or sacked and they're coming in, then there's something that's slightly off at that time. I think with Arteta, because he's been there for long enough, you can see that the club is now in his image, in the same way Man City is in Guardiola's image, in the same way that Liverpool was in Jurgen Klopp's image, and those guys that stayed for longer, you can really feel and see how it's being done. And I think as well from the inside, there are points with managers where you look at it and who has the power? Is it the players or is it the manager? Because some of the people who would be perceived to be deadwood, if they have the power, they're not deadwood, because the manager's going to get fired because they're upsetting this big player. Like, we can relate it to our Aubameyang and Lacazette, who are still having good careers to this point. But Arteta can come in and see that Aubameyang isn't doing things that he believes are right. So if the club backs Aubameyang, Arteta leaves. If the club backs Arteta, then Aubameyang leaves. And now everyone that's left at the club can see, well, this is how we do things. And that has led to them being in this position now where that is the standard. Whereas in the past, like, the people that had the power were the ones who were perhaps at times, like, I wouldn't necessarily say disruptive, but they weren't the ones who were going to be progressing the club forward with the young players and stuff that they had.
I want to take these last two questions because I've been very patient. But how does that happen, that the club backs the player in the locker room? You've been in. How does that backing actually occur?
because the player themselves might be somebody that's been there a while, somebody that's like perceived to be a star from the fans. Like the fans, if a new manager comes in, the fans are more aligned with the players that they've seen for the longer time than they are with the new person that's come in. It's similar to the issue that I think Nagelsmann had when he went to Bayern, and he tries to take away Thomas Muller, tries to take away this Emmanuel Neuer. These are like stalwarts at the football club, but he also knows, Nagelsmann, as a mid-30-year-old, that the long-term future of the club wouldn't feature these two guys. But who's got the power? And when things aren't going well, all of a sudden, the manager's the one that's under pressure, especially because he's taken away two of the bigger pieces within it. If they were pieces who could be there for longer, who are really great at dictating culture and see the manager's modern thinking and so on, then great. But unfortunately, I say at times, like this is saying a lot, but this is the truth. There've been players who I've played with who were in a situation where a manager stops playing them. They'll go up to the manager and say, I will be here longer than you, because the player's got like a multi-year contract and a manager is being linked with being fired the next week. At that point, you tell me who you think's got the power, because it always ends up being the manager that loses their job, as opposed to the manager saying to the board when the team's struggling, you need to get rid of this guy. They're like, okay, we'll sit on that one. Yeah,
it was James Milner, if you want to know who it was. We'll take these two questions really quickly. By the way, the Italian quote, it is the great Trapattoni. Two old friends coming up before we end the night. Christina Stotts, it is always a joy to hear your voice. Tell us where you are and what's your question for the mighty Nedum.
Good evening, Roger Nedum. This is Christina from Joplin, Missouri. Nedum, I have a question based on today's final. Can we shorten the extra time, and can we remove the yellow card for players who take their shirts off in celebration?
Oof. I remember my first season was in 2004, and I think that was the year when they first started to get yellow cards for taking your shirt off, because I think it was Tim Cahill was doing it for Everton, and they tried to clamp down on it in the Premier League because they said it could have been some issue with messaging or something.
It was the sponsors, Nedum.
Yeah.
The sponsors were pissed off that the moment that they scored a goal was the moment that would be in the newspapers or on the internet, and the player wouldn't have their shirt on, so you couldn't see which gambling concern they were representing on the field.
You're not supposed to say that out loud, Rog. It's not the sponsors. It's never the sponsors. It's just general health and safety. And then in regards to added time being less, how long do you think it should be if you don't like 15 minutes each way? What do you reckon?
I was thinking 15 minutes, and then if we're still 0-0 or tied at 15 minutes, go straight to penalties.
I like this make-believe world, Christina. What are we even talking about? Why don't we just go right to a dance-off? We're just fabricating our ability to enforce new rules. I think it should be a dance-off. And I think ultimately that could be the thing that could save modern football. Christina, you are an incredible human being. It's always a joy to hear you say Missouri on my show. But we're going to close with the mighty Bjorn from Alameda, California. Come on with us, you patient human being, Bjorn. What is your question for the mighty Nedum?
Thanks, Raj. My question is about the most interesting man in Serie A, Weston McKennie. And he goes and wins the Coppa Italia, and then he doesn't play another minute. And I know, coach gets fired, and he's got an interim. But I mean, how worried are we here? We've seen what bad managers can do, and I'm just worried about what the future holds for Weston here.
Well, Bjorn, you should probably be very worried, because Weston was linked to Everton today, which made me wonder.
No.
Whether yes, I was like, oh my God, am I the Premier League writer? He's linked to Aston Villa, Newcastle, and Everton, which means obviously he will not be coming to Everton. But What do you? I mean, I'm always fascinated. We obsess here in the United States about our boys. God bless. They're all assembling now in camp. It's a pretty thrilling time. The Copa America lies ahead of us. Not a ball has been kicked, so we can just dream sweet dreams that are untouched by the darkness of reality. And we do see the lens. Our boys are like English players. Ultimately in England, we think our English players are the best. Greater than. And we do look at the world through our lads. But when you speak to human beings, normal human beings, English human beings about our boys, they have a very different POV on them, aka one that kind of puts them more within the pantheon of reality. How do you view Weston? Because he is a fascinating footballer. There's no doubt he's talent skilled.
Yeah.
Speaking to him when he was coming through, a lot of the youth coaches in American football said he's the most talented. But ultimately, it depends on his ability to want it mentally, to focus. He had time in Germany where he was a defiant fist of fury. He came over to Leeds in a very difficult situation, let's just say. Like, the context was not great. The performance was not great. It was deeply forgettable. Arrived back in Italy where Juventus didn't want him, made it very clear. I mean, just embarrassingly so. And he was defiant, tenacious, audacious, and unfurled a season where he was one of Juventus's leading footballers creatively. Like, how do you see? I've just given him the hallmark, the kind of hagiography from an American lens. How do you view Weston McKennie from a more sane, rational, knowledgeable football fan's POV?
To be honest, I think the way you described him is perfectly fair. I like him because I think he's technically good, but I really like him because I think he has an edge. I think anyone that sort of wants to venture out and go to some of the places that he's played, I think you do need an edge. You don't play for Leeds if you're just like kind of chilled out. It's tough down there. It's very, very tough down there. And then to go across to Italy, where the way they perceive football is more, it's like life or death. For some people, it literally is that. So I do like him, but I think to put it into context again, and this is another harsh reality about football, it's not really the space where if you are good, then you'll definitely play, because there could be a million other things that are in play at this point. Say a new manager, and there are times I've seen it myself where a new manager comes in and immediately they want to just disrupt things. So there'll be some players who are immediately out, but these are players that were playing the week before under the old manager. So if you're the player that's now out, like, what do you have to do to get in? Sometimes the answer is there's nothing you can do, but this is a change that they want. And at times those managers are empowered because it won't be the manager's decision. It'll be the board's decision, because maybe they want to offload your contract, but they're trying to find a way to do it through the vehicle of, say, like a manager choosing to do so. And when you're in those...
God, wheels within wheels.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. It's
And do you understand that when you're a player? Are you like, this is why I'm not seeing playing time? Are you just
no, absolutely not. Because I think most people in the chat, most people listening to us now, like, there's something in life that there aren't many things in life that upset us more than injustice, especially when it's injustice against yourself. If you believe yourself to be valuable, but people do not treat you as such, it's very hard to accept it and just move to the next place. Not least of all when the person or the people that will help you move to the next place are your current employers. So they're going to say, yeah, but we're going to move you, but it has to be this price. All of a sudden, the amount of teams that you could go to becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. They might choose to keep you. This is like, it's football. Like, they might say, do you know what? You're not even allowed to train with the team anymore. Or you can't do this, you can't do that. What are you going to do? But I don't think Weston's in that position as such. And I think not least of all those places you named in terms of interest, obviously they're UK based, but he's good enough to get interest from absolutely anywhere. And he's got enough edge to be able to play anywhere. And that's why I think he's a really good player to bring it all the way around. So I hope he finds a situation. I'd personally like him to settle in place for a few years, provided that's what he wants. But until he says that's what he wants, I guess we'll never know.
God, that was one of the greatest answers in the history of the Men in Blazers Media Network. It contained worlds of knowledge. It was on the, it was like the Kabbalah. On the surface, it was about Weston McKennie, but if you plumb the depths of what Nedum just dropped, I do believe the secret of life and human philosophy.
It's in there, yeah. It's in there.
Yeah, it's all in there. Look at him. He's just having, yeah, he's in there. It's in there. Nedum, I'm going to thank you in 1 second. I do just want to bring to a close. Thank you, callers, for your joy that you bring on a Wednesday afternoon after a tough game. If you're not an Olympiacos fan on the eye, to come and bring it is always a joy. We got a lot coming up in the week ahead at the Men in Blazers World Headquarters. All of it brought to you by Michelob Ultra, superior light beer. We're actually headed next week to Kansas City. God, I can't wait for a very special live show, Thursday, June the 6th. Sam Mewis and I are coming into town. I think there's 3 or 4 tickets still available. You can find information on that on our social. If you're in Kansas City, come be with us at the Madrid Theatre. Going to raise a glass or two, a night of nights with Sammy Mewis, celebrating your KC Current. We're back Friday with a brand new episode of WGFOP. Get your Champions League and US Women's National Team Emma Hayes debut questions in at 646 450 9472. I actually have a telephone here. Until then, let me just thank the mighty Nedum. It is a joy, honestly, to listen to you. It is absolutely magic. Where you're watching the Champions League final, and what will the score be on Saturday night?
I'll be watching it from a sofa just down by this side of me here, and the score will be. Do you know what? I'm gonna. No, I can't go against the Real Madrid hive. So it's going to be Real Madrid for the, was it 32nd time, or is it the 15th? I lose count. But yeah, I think it'll be Real Madrid.
Come on, Dortmund, baby. GFOPs, this is Rog, wishing you huge love. Let's not take a second of watching football together for granted. Big love. Remember, Roy is resting. I give you courage.